me and Barney's just doing a little inventory.
For 8 seasons, Andy Griffith welcomed America into Mayberry every Monday night. He was the father figure an entire generation wished they had. But the man behind the sheriff's badge lived a life that looked nothing like the one he led on television. 3 marriages, a son he could not save, and a wife who died young, forgotten by the same public that adored him. By the time he took his last breath in 2012, Andy had lived through devastating struggles the cameras never caught. This is the true story of Andy Griffith and the tragic ending that waited for him and the woman who stood by his side from the beginning. Andy Griffith's brutal childhood. For millions of Americans, the face of Andy Griffith was the face of comfort. It was the face of a small-town sheriff who always had a piece of wisdom and a warm smile. For 8 seasons on The Andy Griffith Show, he embodied a kind of gentle, folksy authority that made viewers feel like everything was right with the world. But the man behind that image, Andy Griffith, came from a world that was far less forgiving. The warmth and wisdom he projected on screen were a carefully constructed persona, a stark contrast to the poverty, isolation, and insecurity that defined his early years. While he would go on to become one of the most beloved figures in television history, the road to fame began on a much rougher path, in a childhood that left scars he would carry for the rest of his life. Andy Griffith was born on June 1, 1926, in Mount Airy, North Carolina. His parents, Carl Lee Griffith and Geneva Nunn Griffith, were working-class people trying to make their way in a difficult world. Carl worked as a carpenter and later as a house painter, but steady work was hard to come by. His family's circumstances were modest, to say the least. In fact, at some point, they lived in a small house that lacked one of the most basic modern conveniences: an indoor bathroom. This was the reality of his early life, a life shaped by the financial pressures of the Great Depression. They were poor, and in a small town, poverty was not something you could easily hide. The other children in Mount Airy could see it. They could see it in the way Andy dressed, in the simple, practical clothes that marked him as different from the kids from more secure families, and they let him know it. School, which should have been a place of learning and opportunity, became a daily trial. Andy was a frequent target of bullies. They mocked him for his appearance, for his family's situation, and for the awkwardness that came from being an outsider in his own community. He was the kid from the wrong side of town, the one who was laughed at. This wasn't just occasional teasing. It was a persistent, grinding cruelty that left deep emotional wounds. He later recalled the isolation, the feeling of being an object of ridicule, and how that experience bred a quiet but potent anger within him. He learned early on that the world was not always a kind place, and that laughter could be a weapon just as easily as it could be a gift. In the face of this isolation, young Andy found refuge in 2 places. The first was in his imagination. He developed a fascination with music and performance. He would listen to records and to the sounds of the world around him, finding a form of expression that didn't require him to be someone he wasn't. He learned to play the guitar and the banjo, losing himself in the melodies. The second refuge was in his faith. He became deeply involved with his local church, and for a while, he felt a calling. He was drawn to the pulpit, to the idea of becoming a Moravian minister. It was a path that promised purpose and a place in a community that had so far rejected him. But the music and the calling to the ministry would eventually merge into something else. At Mount Airy High School, he participated in drama and music programs, finding a stage where his feelings of being an outsider could be channeled into something productive. He wasn't just the poor kid anymore. He was the one who could perform. He soon discovered that he could make people feel something, that he could hold their attention. After high school, Griffith's path led him to the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. He had originally intended to study to become a Moravian minister, but his focus shifted. He immersed himself in music, graduating in 1949 with a Bachelor of Music degree. But a degree in music didn't lead directly to a stage career. Instead, he took a job teaching music and drama at Goldsboro High School in North Carolina. He was a dedicated teacher, trying to pass on to a new generation the creative passions that had sustained him. But the pull of performance was too strong. He began spending his weekends and evenings performing humorous monologues at local churches and civic clubs. Then, in 1953, he recorded a live performance of a monologue he had been developing. It was a rambling, funny story told from the perspective of a country preacher experiencing his first college football game. He called it "What It Was Football." He had the recording pressed into a record, and it became a sensation. It sold over 800,000 copies, turning a high school teacher from North Carolina into a national name almost overnight. He quit teaching and began pursuing a career in entertainment full-time, moving from small clubs to summer stock theater and, eventually, to Broadway. The success of his comedy record led to a starring role on Broadway in a play called No Time for Sergeants, which in turn led to a remarkable dramatic role in the Elia Kazan film A Face in the Crowd. It was a part that tapped directly into the anger and ambition he had carried since childhood. He was on a trajectory toward massive success, but the foundations of that success, the insecurities and the quiet rage, were still there, buried beneath the surface. And those buried emotions would eventually make his life, even at the height of his fame, far more complicated than anyone watching him on television could ever have imagined. Andy's career struggles. By the early 1960s, Andy Griffith had become one of the most trusted faces on American television. His show was a massive hit, ranking among the top 10 programs for most of its 8-season run. To the public, Andy Griffith had arrived. He was exactly where he belonged. But the man inside that comfortable sheriff's uniform did not always feel at home. For Andy Griffith, the success of The Andy Griffith Show came with its own set of quiet frustrations. He was the star, the man whose name was in the title. But week after week, a large share of the laughter and the attention went to someone else, his friend Don Knotts. Knotts played Deputy Barney Fife, and his comedic brilliance was impossible to ignore. He was a scene stealer in the best sense of the word, and audiences loved him. Griffith understood this. He had hired Knotts specifically to bring that energy to the show. He knew that Barney made Andy work, but there were moments when Griffith felt overshadowed in his own series. He was the straight man, the calm center around which the chaos swirled. It was a crucial role, but it was not the one that got the biggest laughs. When the show ended in 1968, Griffith made a deliberate choice to walk away. He did not want to be Sheriff Andy Taylor for the rest of his life. He was an actor with range, and he wanted to prove it. So he turned down offers to revive the character and tried to move on. But America would not let him. The image of Andy Taylor was too powerful. It was burned into the public mind. Every new role he took was judged against the gentle sheriff. He tried variety shows, but they never quite caught on. He starred in a few television movies and series, but none of them connected with audiences. He had become a victim of his own success. He was so good at being Andy Taylor that no one would accept him as anyone else. This period, stretching through much of the 1970s and into the 80s, became a kind of professional wilderness for him. To make matters worse, Andy also faced financial pressures. Everyone knows acting is an unstable profession. even for the famous. There were years when the money was good and years when it was not. Contracts had to be negotiated. Work had to be found. Griffith had a family to support, and the uncertainty of the business weighed on him. He felt the pressure to keep working, to stay relevant, and to prove that he was more than a memory from a black-and-white television show. That proof finally came in 1986, nearly 2 decades after he left Mayberry. He was cast as Ben Matlock in a new legal drama called Matlock. The show was a perfect fit. Matlock was a folksy, shrewd defense attorney from the South who always won his case. He was a man in a comfortable suit instead of a uniform, but he carried the same calm authority as Andy Taylor. The difference was that Matlock had an edge. He was sharper, more impatient, and operating in a world of crime and courtrooms. Audiences embraced him. Matlock ran for 9 seasons and reintroduced Andy Griffith to a new generation. But the long years of struggle, the frustration of being typecast, and the pressure of a career that had so many ups and downs had taken a toll. While he was finding his footing again professionally, his personal life was far less steady. The same man who could project such calm on television was struggling to find it at home. His first marriage, which had begun long before Mayberry, was falling apart, and the way he loved was just as complicated as the career he had fought so hard to build. Andy's first marriage. In the late 1940s, while Andy was still a student at the University of North Carolina, studying to make a life in the arts, he met someone who shared his passions completely. Her name was Barbara Bray Edwards. Barbara was born in North Carolina in 1926, the same year as Andy. Like him, she had a deep love for music and performance. She was a singer with a strong, clear voice and had a presence on stage that drew people in. She performed in choirs and in local theater productions, where Andy was still finding his footing, still carrying the weight of his difficult childhood. Barbara seemed more at ease in the world of performance. They instantly recognized an intense connection in each other, and on August 22, 1949, shortly after Andy graduated from the university, they were married. They were both young, talented, and ready to take on the world together. For the next several years, as Andy taught high school during the day and performed at night, Barbara was there. She was his partner, his sounding board, and his support system. Friends and family who knew them during those early years often described Barbara as a stabilizing force in Andy's life. He had a temper, a residue of those childhood years of being bullied, and she had a way of calming him, of bringing him back to center. There was, however, one area of their life together that brought private sorrow. They wanted children, but they were unable to have them biologically. The inability to have a child was a struggle for the couple, something they did not discuss publicly, but that weighed on them both. They chose to build their family through adoption. In 1957, they adopted a son, whom they named Andy Samuel Griffith Jr. They called him Sam, and a few years later, they adopted a daughter, Dixie. To the outside world, the Griffiths were a picture of happiness. Andy was becoming a television star, and they had the family they had always wanted. But the pressures of fame were beginning to build. The Andy Griffith Show was not just a job, it was a phenomenon. Filming a television series demands long hours and constant attention. Andy was the center of it all. He was not just the star, he was also deeply involved in the production side of the show. His days were consumed by Mayberry. When he came home, he was often exhausted, his mind still on the work. Barbara, who had her own artistic ambitions, found herself living in the shadow of her husband's massive success. She had given up much of her own performing to support his career and raise their children. The life they had, and the privacy they once valued, was gone. As the 1960s wore on, the couple who had once seemed so connected began growing apart. They spent less time together. The conversations that had once flowed easily became strained. Andy was focused on his career, on the show, and on the next thing. Barbara was focused on the children and on managing a household that was no longer private. The emotional distance between them widened. They had been together for over 20 years, but the foundation they had built was cracking. In 1972, after 23 years of marriage, they divorced. The official reason given was irreconcilable differences. Those 3 words covered a lot of ground: the pressures of Hollywood, the demands of fame, and the slow drift of 2 people who had grown in different directions. It was the end of a long chapter. Barbara had been with Andy since before anyone knew his name. She had been there for the teaching job, the comedy record, the Broadway debut, the film, and the long run of the television show. But in the end, it was not enough to hold them together. The divorce marked a turning point for Andy Griffith. He was 46 years old, famous beyond measure, and now alone. The stable family life he had built with Barbara was gone, and what followed was a period in his personal life that became increasingly complicated. The years after his first marriage would be marked by new relationships, new weddings, and new heartbreaks. Andy's chaotic love life. After his marriage to Barbara ended, Andy Griffith did not stay alone for long. In the early 1970s, he met someone new, someone who came from a world very different from his own North Carolina roots. Her name was Solika Kasuto. She was a Greek actress, known mostly in her home country. She had a background in the performing arts, but she was not a familiar face to American audiences. The details of their meeting are private, known only to those who were close to them. But by 1973, they were married. The marriage to Solika was a new chapter. She was younger, from a different culture, and she brought a different energy into his life. For a few years, they made it work. But the same pressures that had contributed to the end of his first marriage began to surface again. Griffith's career was demanding. He was traveling, working on projects, and trying to rebuild. Solika, by nature, valued her privacy. She was not interested in being a Hollywood wife, in the constant attention that came with being married to a television legend. The distance between them grew. They had no children together, which removed one possible bond, but also meant there was less holding them together when things got difficult. After about 6 years of marriage, they separated, and in 1981, the divorce was finalized. The reason, once again, was listed as irreconcilable differences, and it marked the end of another short-lived attempt at finding lasting love. But Griffith did not give up. In the early 1980s, while working on a television movie, he met someone who would change his life. The film was called Murder in Coweta County, and it starred Griffith alongside the country music legend Johnny Cash. It was a serious project, a drama based on a true story. On that set, Griffith met a young actress named Cindy Knight. Cindy Knight was born in 1953. She was from Florida and had begun her acting career in the early 1980s, appearing in small roles on television and in films. She was 27 years younger than Andy Griffith. When they met, he was 57. She was 30. The age difference was significant, but it did not seem to matter. They connected on the set of that film, and the connection was strong. On April 12, 1983, just a short time after they met, they were married. It was a quick decision, but it would prove to be the most lasting relationship of his life. Cindy Knight was different from the women who came before her. She understood the demands of the business because she worked in it herself. But more than that, she seemed to understand Andy Griffith himself. She saw past the image of Andy Taylor and past the frustrations of the man who had spent years trying to escape that role. She saw him for who he was, with all his complexities. In the years that followed, as Griffith found his footing again with Matlock and enjoyed a major career resurgence, Cindy was there. She was not just his wife. She was his partner in a way that went beyond the surface. She traveled with him, supported him, and helped manage the later years of his life and career. They did not have children together. By the time they married, Griffith was nearing 60, and the chapter of raising a family was behind him. But what they built was something deeper. It was a partnership that would endure for nearly 3 decades, through the highs of the Matlock years, through the quiet period that followed, and through the challenges of aging. Cindy Knight became his anchor, much as Barbara had been in those early years, but with a difference. This time, Griffith was older, wiser, and more aware of what he needed. He had spent years searching for stability, and in Cindy, he finally found it. But even as he found peace in his marriage, life was preparing to deliver a blow that no amount of stability could soften. The greatest tragedy of Andy Griffith's life was still ahead. It was a loss so profound that it would change him forever. A father's worst nightmare that would test everything he had built and everything he believed. Andy's greatest struggle. Andy Griffith loved being a father. His son, Sam, and his daughter, Dixie, were the family he had always wanted, the children who would carry his name forward. And for years, Griffith worked hard to protect them from the glare of his fame. But as the years passed, it became clear that Sam was struggling. He battled alcoholism and he struggled with substance abuse. These were private battles, fought away from the public eye, but they were battles he could not seem to win. Sam tried to build a life for himself. He worked in real estate in North Carolina, staying close to his roots and trying to stay out of the spotlight that had followed his father for decades. But the addictions were powerful, and they did not let go. For Andy Griffith, watching his son struggle was a different kind of agony. He had spent his career playing a father who always knew the right thing to say, who could guide young Opie through any problem with a gentle word and a patient smile. But life was not a 30-minute television show, and the problems Sam faced could not be solved in a single episode. In 1996, the battle came to an end when Sam tragically died at the age of 38. The years of alcoholism and substance abuse had finally caught up with him. The official cause of death was not widely publicized, out of respect for the family's privacy. But the loss was real, and it was devastating. For Griffith, the loss of Sam was the deepest wound of his life. It overshadowed every professional struggle, every failed marriage, and every moment of frustration he had ever faced. Nothing compared to this. Nothing could. In the years that followed, friends and family noticed a change in him. The loss had aged him in ways that time alone could not. He became more private and more guarded. The laughter that had always come easily on screen was harder to find in his personal life. He carried the weight of that loss with him every day. Cindy, his wife, was there beside him, helping him through the darkness. But some grief is too heavy for even the most loving partner to lift alone. The years that followed would bring new challenges for Andy. Age was catching up with him, and his health was beginning to fail. The final chapter of Andy Griffith's life was approaching, and it would bring with it a series of declines and difficulties that even his closest friends could not have predicted. The tragic end of Griffith and his wife. In the years following his son's death, Andy Griffith slowed down. The man who had once carried 2 hit television shows, who had performed on Broadway and recorded Grammy-winning music, began to retreat from the world. He and Cindy lived quietly on Roanoke Island, on the coast of North Carolina. It was a peaceful setting, a place where the water met the land, far from the noise of Hollywood. But peace did not mean good health. Griffith had struggled with his heart for many years. Cardiovascular disease was a constant presence in his life, something he managed but could not escape. In 2000, at the age of 74, he underwent quadruple heart bypass surgery. It was a major procedure, the kind that reminds a person of their own mortality. He recovered, but his body was never quite the same. On top of the heart problems, he also dealt with diabetes and high blood pressure. These conditions wore him down over time, and his mobility even became limited. In his final years, he needed help walking and was often seen with a cane or using other assistants. The man who had moved so easily across television screens was now confined to his home and his property, living a quiet, private life. Reports from those years described him as something of a recluse. He did not seek attention. He did not give many interviews. He stayed close to Cindy and close to home. The spotlight that had followed him for decades had finally moved on, and he seemed content to let it go. He spent his time on his beloved North Carolina coast, surrounded by the landscape that had shaped him. On the morning of July 3, 2012, Andy Griffith died of a heart attack at the age of 86. He passed away in his home on Roanoke Island, with his family around him. It was the kind of ending he would have wanted, quiet and private, away from the cameras. In keeping with his wishes, the arrangements were handled quickly. Within 4 or 5 hours of his death, he was buried. There was no public funeral, and no long procession of celebrities giving statements. He wanted a simple, private burial on his own property. And that is exactly what he got. Andy's first wife, Barbara Bray Edwards, met her own end in a very different but equally tragic way. After their divorce in 1972, Barbara chose to step away from the spotlight completely. She lived quietly, focusing on her children, Sam and Dixie. But like Andy, she carried private sorrows. Watching her son Sam struggle with addiction through the years was a heavy burden. She loved him, but she could not save him from his own demons. And that pain stayed with her. In the late 1970s, Barbara's own health began to decline. She battled illness quietly, away from public attention. In 1980, 8 years after her divorce from Andy, she died. She was 53 years old. The cause was listed as natural causes, the result of an illness that was never widely publicized. When Andy learned of Barbara's death, he did not make a public statement. That was not his way. But those close to him said he was deeply saddened. Barbara was not just his first wife. She was the person who had been there before any of it started. She had known him when he was a young man with a music degree and a teaching job, before the comedy record, before Broadway, and before Mayberry. Insider reports noted that Griffith held these losses close. The death of his first wife, the death of his son years later. These were the kinds of tragedies that could not be shared with an audience. They were private and personal, and they shaped the man behind the public face. When Andy Griffith eventually died in 2012, the nation mourned. They mourned Andy Taylor. They mourned Ben Matlock. And they mourned the warm, familiar face that had been part of their lives for decades. But the man himself, the real Andy Samuel Griffith from Mount Airy, North Carolina, had already lived through so much more than anyone watching from their living rooms could ever have known. His ending was quiet, private, and exactly as he wanted it. But the life that led to that ending was filled with struggles that no television show ever captured. What's your favorite memory of Andy Griffith? Drop your answers in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, Don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.